Anybody still joining us? We're sharing in the chat box where we're from and what types of libraries or other organizations we represent. So we've got a lot of folks from the public library world. We've got folks from all over the US, a couple of folks from Canada, one from the UK. We're logging in from all over. Just share and say hello in that box there. Okay, Tennessee. More public libraries. Okay, Portugal, wow. Welcome Inez from Portugal. Got someone else from the UK and Canada. Got some international representation. Thank you so much. It's very exciting. And from public libraries, excellent. Well, we are representing, we're representing public library world well, but Jocelyn here is from the Mississippi Valley State University. Thank you for joining us from the academic library world. If anyone's still joining us, we're using the chat box over here on the left side of your screen to say hello, share with everyone where we're from and what type of library or organization we represent. We have people from all over the country, got Mississippi, Tennessee, Kansas, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Missouri, California, Oregon, also a couple from Canada, UK, and Portugal. And New Zealand, wow, very cool, Anna. Thank you for joining us. Okay, well, we are going to get started here in probably just a minute or so, get everyone settled. It is, oh, from Hawaii, aloha, Cheryl. Thank you for joining us, everyone. It is just 1:30 Pacific Standard Time here where I am in Oregon, USA. So just make sure everyone sees there on the screen the Makerspace Library 2.017 Worldwide Virtual Conferences Makerspaces logo there. You got your hashtags. Okay, we are going to get started then. I want to just thank our sponsors. They are listed here. And our recording has started. So I'm going to check. Can someone just put in the chat box that you are seeing my slides? Now it should be a bright green slide. Someone just say, yes, you're seeing that green slide. Thank you, Inez. Okay, so like I said, we will begin here. Got a full house. My name is Janelle Youngblood. I'm from the Hillsboro, Oregon Public Library. And I'll be talking today about involving volunteers in your makerspace. And I know some of the publicity out there said that my former colleague Rachel Seltz would be presenting this today, but I am in fact presenting it. So I am with you here today. Although most of us work with volunteers out of a need to have bodies in the room and have hours in our space, I want to highlight the benefit of engaging volunteers to fulfill your library's or your makerspace's mission and offer unbounding enthusiasm and an array of expertise that most library staffers could only dream of offering on their own. So like I said, I'm from Hillsboro, Oregon. Hillsboro is a city of about 100,000 people outside Portland, Oregon. Our library is a city department, but participates in a county cooperative. We serve a diverse community here in Hillsboro. About a quarter of our residents identify as either Hispanic or Latino. A large percentage also come from other parts of the world, including Southeast Asia and the Middle East, because of our high-tech corporate neighbors like Intel. As a result, our residents generally have a slightly higher education level and income than other regions in the state. Our makerspace is called the Collaboratory. It opened just about 6 months ago and occupies a former underused computer lab at our Brookwood Library location. We have a wide variety of equipment and supplies, including 3D printers, die cutters, microcontrollers, sewing machines, arts and crafts materials, and the list goes on. We developed this space with a relatively small budget and no dedicated staff. My role in the Strategic Initiatives Division, our project group, was to get the place up and running with $5,000 and an intern. We began work in late December 2016 and opened on May 2nd, 2017. We were able to do this largely because of a core of volunteers who really came out of the woodwork ready and willing to help. We engaged volunteers from the start, in part because we needed help staffing the space, but the number of volunteers we rely on to staff the space really also gives it a breadth and depth that a staff person could never offer on their own. In addition, our library's mission is to support the pursuit of connection, inspiration, and lifelong learning, and that includes our volunteers. We involved volunteers from the get-go when they approached us or we approached them during construction. They attended trainings and ran classes before we even opened. They were also critical to getting people in the door via word of mouth when we did open. We offer 4 types of events in the Collaboratory: open labs, meetups, classes, and self-service. Open labs are a free time for anyone to drop in and explore the space. Any of the equipment can be used during this time without any training or certification. Meetups are like open labs, but for specific interest areas. We have 3D printing meetups, microcontroller meetups, cosplay meetups, fabric and fibers meetups, a coloring club, and a paper crafting meetup. Classes are what they sound like, directed instruction on a specific topic. The last part of our service model, self-service, is something we offer to patrons who need or want a little more time in the Collaboratory outside of regularly scheduled events. I'll talk more about this later, but we're working on training volunteers to run the certification process for this type of use. Volunteers are trained to be open lab and meetup hosts. Hosting is a social role, and we stress interest and curiosity over expertise. In trainings, I explain that volunteers don't have to have experience with everything, but must have the willingness to say, "Let's find out," rather than "I don't know." As a host, our volunteers have as much a social role as a technical or instructional role. We also have a consultant role for volunteers that doesn't show up on our service model, but plays a key role in helping us maintain high-tech equipment or choose just the right tools or supplies. Many of our volunteers also come to us as instructors because they're more comfortable with the structure of a class versus the unknown elements of drop-in open labs or meetups. For example, in this photo on this slide, the woman second from the left and on the far right are volunteers from a local quilters guild who are required to present classes for their nonprofit status. I met them at a local arts and culture workshop, and when I heard they needed a space and audience to teach, we were able to offer an opportunity. This type of partnership with volunteer instructors especially has helped us grow and connect with different demographics throughout the community. As I said previously, the vast majority of the Collaboratory's volunteers come from our high-tech neighbors here in the Silicon Forest. To find our volunteers, we tapped our usual resources, including current volunteers and regional hubs like Volunteer Match and Hands on Portland. From there, our project was disseminated into newsletters and email blasts at these companies. We had our project written up in the local paper, and we relied on word of mouth among staff and volunteers. Many of our volunteers get credit with their employers, or their employers donate funds to us for hours worked in the Collaboratory. Besides these incentives, we have a strong reading culture in the Pacific Northwest, and many folks new to the area end up at the library. Lots of young professionals cite wanting to meet people as a reason they come to volunteer at the library. Since opening in May 2017, we've trained 70 volunteers who have put in 800 hours. A little under half of these volunteers are regular or consistently volunteering each month. About 60% are employed and about 15% are retired. Another 10% are students, and the last 15% identify as other. They're folks who are looking for work or at-home parents. When it comes to the mechanics of recruiting and screening volunteers, we have a volunteer coordinator who reviews applications and does brief in-person interviews to gauge suitability and interest. It's not so much a formal interview as a chance for both us and the potential volunteer to get a feel for how they might be useful and where they might fit in. In this way, some volunteers self-select out of the training process, and others can be guided on a development path to get them ready for volunteering with the programs or in the department they're interested in. Because of the nature of the equipment and the work involved in the Collaboratory, our volunteers need to be 16 to teach or host open labs or meetups. We bring new volunteers into the Collaboratory each month for a training that covers policies and procedures, as well as the tools in the space. We try to streamline the training process for new volunteers by training groups of 6 to 8 people together and combining the basic library volunteer orientation with the Collaboratory specific training. But as you might expect, the bulk of the learning comes through doing. In our trainings, we offer plenty of hands-on time to explore the tools and equipment. We're working on having more experienced volunteers do this part of the tool training to facilitate networking and ownership, which I'll talk more about in a bit. Beyond the initial training, we encourage new volunteers to attend open labs, acting like patrons, to play around and get comfortable with the space. We found that training and support of continued training, either formally or informally, is one of the critical components of getting and keeping good volunteers. These folks are curious by nature and are driven to improve themselves so they can better serve patrons. Courtney's asking, how many volunteers a month participate in training? We usually have between 6 and 8. We've had as few as 2 or 3, but we usually cap it around 8. And do feel free to jump in with questions as we go along. I'll get to them when I have a pause. So we're also working on adding continuing education trainings led by volunteers for volunteers who want more in-depth training on a particular tool. In the next year, we'd like to offer monthly continuing education trainings for volunteers on a rotating series of popular topics like 3D printing or robots. We intentionally encourage a broad array of interests or particular areas of expertise, but like I said, our volunteers are curious by nature and have really craved more in-depth training so they can help patrons. We post volunteer shifts every month, and volunteers sign up through our online volunteer database and scheduling service of Volgistics. Most shifts are 2 hours, and volunteers can sign up for as many or as few as they'd like. We typically open 2 slots per shift, so volunteers have a chance to work with someone else. This is especially nice for the meetups, which are typically attended by a similar group of people every month. Even though we've been open 6 months, we haven't established a great pattern or balance between when volunteers are available and when patrons come to use the Collaboratory. To plan our first month and get a handle on general availability, we asked our opening volunteers, about 40 in total, to provide their availability in 2-hour blocks over the library's open hours. This was certainly useful information, but we continue to experiment with scheduling, especially for our drop-in open labs, which are the most unpredictable in terms of patron interest as opposed to registered classes or meetups on specific topics. Anna says, what software do we use? We use something called Volgistics. And I'll put that in the chat here. I'll tell you, I know there are other softwares out there. They're all a bit different. Volgistics isn't our favorite. If others have other softwares or scheduling services they use, feel free to put them in the chat box here. In the future, we hope to be able to pair volunteers, volunteer open lab hosts according to interest areas. We already have some pairs and teams that consistently sign up together and have all the more fun for it. We also hope to be able to advertise any expertise we can offer during specific times. Even if the space is open to any type of activity, a volunteer wearing a badge that says, "Ask me about robots," gives an uncertain patron an entry into a conversation that may not have started otherwise. So Courtney asks, is this something that's offered 5 to 6 days a week? It depends. We usually do offer some type of event in the Collaboratory nearly every day of the week, depending on availability. It really does depend. As you can see here, this is our October schedule right here on the slide, and that's our frequency. It goes up and down depending on how many events we have going around in other places in the library too. At new volunteer trainings, I always make a point to remind volunteers that we're here to be responsive to and reflective of our community's wants and needs, and that includes them. By acknowledging volunteers' value and giving them ownership opportunities, we've discovered that our volunteers are willing to do more than just host events and teach classes. They're marketing pros that talk us up to everyone they know. They record and report on trends in the Makerspace using a shared Word document and go above and beyond fixing equipment during their shifts and outside open hours. The photo on this slide is what happened after I asked a couple of our paper crafting meetup hosts to finish a project started by an intern. They finished sorting a massive donation of rubber stamps into categories and then labeled the drawers using self-adhesive vinyl and our die cutter. This was a project that could have sat undone for weeks or months, but a simple request was all it took. As I've mentioned already, we're working on expanding this kind of agency and ownership to our training and certification processes. We've asked volunteers to help out with new volunteer trainings by leading the hands-on tool training portion of these trainings. This way, new volunteers will learn from experts on those tools and from folks who use these tools day in and out, not just a staff person who troubleshoots the best she can. We're also working with volunteers to lead self-service certifications for patrons who want to use the Collaboratory outside of regularly scheduled events. This involves providing some policy overview, but mostly ensuring that patrons can use the equipment safely and properly on their own. Again, involving volunteers this way gives them additional agency and gives patrons another opportunity to learn from real experts. Involving volunteers in this project, certainly to staff the space, but more importantly to add depth and breadth to our services, continually inspires me and assures me that what we're doing, offering an intentionally shared and social space for people to learn by doing, is working. Aligning our volunteer program with our mission, providing inspiration, connection, and lifelong learning, gives us the opportunity to give volunteers real ownership over the Collaboratory. I believe this has been critical to retaining volunteers. For example, the volunteers in this photo came to me and said they wanted to start a cosplay meetup. As a public library, it's easy to say yes when our patrons want something. That's what we're here for, after all. They started with one meetup per month, but soon asked for another time slot. They now meet twice monthly and draw cosplayers from the surrounding area, including a regular attendee who travels from about 60 miles away. Our cosplay volunteers helped us exhibit at the Portland Mini Maker Fair this fall, too, by talking up the space and showing off some of their creations, like a deft punk helmet, and troubleshooting our teen robotics camp's obstacle-avoiding robots. The cosplayers were given the responsibility for planning a make-and-take craft, a foam crown for kids. They were thrilled to hear kids and parents say, "Oh, this is where we make the crowns," when they saw our booth. Facilitating activities like these and involving volunteers in our decision-making and development process has only strengthened our service to the community and our relationship with our volunteers. In terms of feedback, we collect lots of informal feedback from day to day, but we also hosted a volunteer feedback meeting about 3 months after opening and hope to plan another in the coming months. At our first feedback meeting, we had food, drinks, and thank you cards on hand for each of the volunteers, and were able to answer lots of questions and get lots of new ideas. Some of the things the volunteers said they wanted included a forum for volunteer communication, projects to work on during slow times, more idea, pattern, and instruction books, an expansion of our coloring club to include drawing and illustration, a Facebook page separate from the libraries, and a meetup.com subscription. We're working on a lot of this. Not all of it's going to happen right away, but as you can tell, this is a network of really talented and really caring people. They want the best for the Collaboratory because they've been given the opportunity to really make things happen in this space. Finally, volunteers have been absolutely critical to the success of the Collaboratory here at the Hillsboro Public Library. Sure, they've logged long hours after work and on their weekends, but they've also drawn hundreds of patrons to open labs, meetups, and classes, shared expertise I could only dream of gaining, and truly owned the mission of the library and the Collaboratory. Even as the Collaboratory has gained ground and additional staff are brought on board, I'm certain that volunteers will and must continue to play a distinct and very significant role in its development over time. I hope this was an informative session and helps just a little bit with any questions, concerns, or hopes you have for involving volunteers in your library's makerspace. My contact information is here on the screen. You can check out our website. I'd also like to thank our volunteer coordinator, Molly Brandt, for helping me develop and refine this session. Thank you for joining me, and hang out here while we answer questions. You can go ahead and type them in the chat box here, and I'll do my best to answer them. So Courtney had asked, what has been the most popular collaboratory event that has been offered? Cardboard VR headsets was very popular. Arduino, anything 3D printing is off the wall popular. Our crochet class, that also was extremely popular, filled up really quickly. Lindsay asks, do you have dedicated staff exclusively assigned to do all of this? There's no staff person assigned exclusively to do this. I'm a full-time staff person, and this is one of a few of my development projects here at the library. So that's part of why volunteers have been so critical to us getting this off the ground and making it a sustainable space. Christina says, do you do evaluations to get feedback on the content of volunteer classes and workshops? Nothing formal. We do take attendance, of course, but also we ask volunteers to, volunteer instructors to share with us any comments or questions they have. Some instructors have given more formal surveys, which has been really fun. So that's still kind of developing. And Christina also asks, do you do background checks on volunteers? Yes, we're a city department, and so all of the applications that we get for volunteers are run through the city's background check service. So yes, we do that. Have any of the library staff, Anne, excuse me, have any of the library staff been trained to deliver sessions? We have had some library staff present classes in the Collaboratory. It's mostly been on their own area of expertise. We have someone doing a vinyl heat press workshop coming up. We have someone doing a book folding workshop. We have a staff person who did a rug hooking workshop. It was just part of their expertise. They did it on their work time, so that was really fun too. Janet asks, how many registrants do you generally allow in your workshops? It's a fairly small space. It seats 12 really comfortably. So depending on how much equipment is needed or how much instructor time is required, it depends. It really up to 12 if the instructor is capable of that. But we've also had some more technical classes that require a smaller group so the instructor can have more one-on-one time. So say like 6 people. Courtney asks, book folding. Yes, it's a really fun, really beautiful art of folding the pages in a book one by one in a particular pattern, so that when you fan out the pages, it creates an image. So look it up. It's really, really excellent. Any other questions? I want to thank you all for joining me. We ended with 55. If anyone still in the room here has questions about anything that wasn't that I maybe covered in the beginning, but wasn't clear later on, feel free to jump in and ask any questions. You are all very welcome. I'm glad you learned something. Feel free to reach out to me. Glad you enjoyed it. Thank you all. I will stay here until 2 o'clock to answer any questions. So feel free to stick around if you have something you want to talk about. I'm happy to do that. More about the role of the volunteer coordinator. Absolutely. So this is a full-time role here at our library. She coordinates all of the volunteers through all of the different departments in the library. Most of what she does is the recruiting and screening. She handles that, the background checks. She does some general orientation for volunteers, but we actually, in the Collaboratory, combine the general orientation with the Collaboratory specific one, just because there's so much information and we don't want to have them sit through 2 different trainings. So she's been really, really valuable in getting people in the door and communicating with them, working with the scheduling software. I just send her the events I want to have during the month, and she sets up the shifts and sends that out, manages that database. It's really really helpful to have someone with a bit of an HR mind, and so that's something that if you're considering including volunteers at the library, having someone who can focus on that area, kind of the people part of it instead of the work aspect is really good. What's on your dream list? Let's see, Lindsay asked, what's on your dream list for Makerspace equipment? We are getting a laser cutter later this fall, so that's still there. A CNC mill I think would always still be fun, even though I think that the popularity of that is fading somewhat. A really big 3D printer I think would be fun, and to have it on display and running almost all the time would be really cool. Will my slides be available? So this is all recorded, and so you'll be able to see it all as a recording. It'll be archived on the conference website, so you can go back and look at that. Oh, Jenny, you have Collaboratory also. Awesome. Kyle, are we a union library? We are not a union library, no. Thank you. You are all so welcome. Again, I'll be here till 2 o'clock if you have any other questions. I appreciate all of the interest. This has been a really fun little session here. So again, I'll be here until under 5 minutes to answer any specific questions. If anybody missed something at the beginning that didn't make sense at the end, feel free to chime in and ask away. If you don't get a chance to ask a question here, you can feel free to contact me at collaboratory@hillsboro-oregon.gov. You can also check out our website there, see what we're about, see what's going on. Thanks again for joining us, everybody. If you have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat box there. Any questions or comments you might have, you put them in the chat box there, or you can email me at collaboratory@hillsboro-oregon.gov. I want to thank you all for joining me. This is my first web conference, so it was really fun to have a full house. If anyone's still left in the room, we are just waiting a few more minutes. If you have a question or comment you'd like to share, feel free to put that in the chat box. You can also email me at collaboratory@hillsboro-oregon.gov.